Our first procedure in doing an armor coat is to make sure that the vehicle's clean. We use a wax and grease remover to do any of the areas that we're going to apply the armor coat. So we'll start with applying wax and grease remover, wipe it off, make sure everything has no wax, silicone, or any of the contaminants that we would have just as we were prepping it for paint. Once the vehicle is completely wiped down and dried, our next step will be to start masking the vehicle off for overspray. We start under the hood first. The reason we do that is so that we can have our tape line in one continuous line up over the fenders, over the hood, so when we pull it, we don't have it in separate pieces. I'm applying the fine line to the back sides of the mirrors where the product can't be applied. This will give us a nice smooth line along the edge of the back of the mirrors. If you try to spray the back of the mirrors with the outside, normally overspray will occur, so we always mask these off on the edge. Tape the vehicle off just as you would if you were applying paint to the vehicle. The paint process is exactly the same. We just want to make sure we have no overspray and that our tape lines are nice and clean along the edges. We're going to be putting 10 coats of clear rubber on this vehicle, so you don't want to overmask because it will pull a rough edge. The reason we tape underneath the hood first is now we're going to apply the tape line. The tape line can be different on every car depending on how the customer wants the angles and how far back they want you to put the product. A normal procedure is about a foot back. On this car, we're going to go towards the front off the sharp body line. The customer didn't want it out onto the flat spot of the hood. The tape lines, I like to follow the contours of the body instead of a straight line across the front of the car. It takes away from the vehicle. This way it actually adds to the car and it is way less noticeable. I like to measure from side to side on where the tape line's going to end up. One of the things about it is a clear tape line, so if it's off just a hair, it doesn't stand out on the vehicle because you don't really notice it. We try to make them as uniform as we can. The next step is we're going to tape back from our tape line, and we're going to go back around 1/4 inch. And the reason we do this is so we can paper from this line, and we don't have to pull the masking paper off this while it's wet, because we pull this orange tape line is going to come off the car while the product is completely wet. After we paper back from this line, we will just bridge this gap with a piece of tape so we can remove this tape and this line at the same time while the product's wet. Depending on the complex front of the vehicle will depend on the tape time it normally requires to do an armor coat. An average armor coat should take between 2 to 3 hours. There's vehicles out there that we spend 2 to 3 hours just taping on. So that is something to take into consideration when bidding the installation of the armor coat. Because of the thickness of the product, we're going to be putting 10 coats on here, which is approximately 10 mils of product. You're better off to over tape than you are to under tape. If you were to tape onto the area you're going to paint and pull a line, you could chance having a rough edge. Because the product's clear, it doesn't have a problem if it seeps in between like a grill and the bumper, or even in between the headlights, as long as we're not taping solid against the areas we're trying to spray. On the end of our tape line, we wrap this piece of tape, our fine line tape, and we put another piece of tape around this, so we made a pull tab. This way when we're done, as soon as we're done with the product while it's still wet, we'll remove this orange line plus this tape line in between. The paper will stay attached to the vehicle. This is to help you not get dirt into the product and also not chance the paper falling into it while it's wet. Once we get the vehicle masked, our next step is to sand the areas that you can see that are going to be ready for the armor coat. We start out with a red Scotch-Brite pad from 3M for all of our edges, and we like a red Scotch-Brite pad for our DA that we use to get the larger areas. These will ensure that the product has a good scratch to hold the product. It is all mechanical bond, so this product has to be sanded anywhere you want it to stick. I'm starting to scuff any of the areas that I can't get the DA onto first. Your sanded area just has to be dull. That's a uniform scratch. The product will hold just fine on that. Gently run the Scotch-Brite along the front edge of your tape line with the tape line, not against it, to ensure we have good adhesion along this edge. Scuff pad got a sharp line. I like to put pressure on this edge go right along the edge of my tape line. This will make sure, and you need this line sanded right up to the edge to hold a clean line. Run the scuff pad in between your lamps, grills, any areas that you can let that pad slide in between. This should ensure good adhesion. ArmorCoat holds very well as far as adhesion goes, but to ensure we don't have a peeling problem, we make sure that all the edges are scuffed well. Once we take it into the spray room, we get better lighting, and we can also find any areas that need touched up at that time, but most of the prepping is done out of the booth. Once we have our edges sanded that we're happy with, we'll run over this now with the DA, and we're going to get to larger areas that make this a more uniform scratch. In order to hold these pads onto a DA, you need this, it's called an interface soft pad. 3M makes these, Norton makes these, and they apply to a hook-it style pad, and then your pad will stick to that. You don't want to run the DA up onto the line so that we end up rubbing the edge of the line. If you do that, you can end up making a rough edge on your line, which will require you to reshoot the hood. As you can see, the DA makes a lot more uniform scratch than going over it with a scuff pad. This is why we go back over with the DA, especially in the frontal areas where we want perfect adhesion. You can tell the difference where we sand with the DA sander versus where we scuff by hand. The paint still has a shine to it here, and you can see the scratches. Here, it's completely dull. There's areas that are impossible to get a sander. You get your DA sander, so you can only get the biggest areas that you can connect on the front. We like to ensure the front edge is your main source of sanding, just due to the fact that that's where it's going to get the majority of its rock chip. Our last step before putting the vehicle into the spray room was blowing off the dust that we just acquired by sanding it. This will be the last step. We'll move the car into the booth and wipe it down one more time before we start the spray. Our next step is to wax and grease the vehicle for the last time. We're going to wipe it down one more time and seal the booth up before the painter puts the suit on and starts mixing up the product. This last clean ensures that we've got all the sanding dust out of the paint, of the factory paint, to make sure we have good adhesion. The reason for spraying the wax and grease remover on it is it will float the particulates that are in the paint on top. Instead of wiping them into it, it'll float it so you can pick it up with a rag to pull it out. If you just use a solvent rag to wipe with your wax and grease, you can actually push the dirt into the fresh paint. Most wax and grease removers have an anti-static in them, which also helps for dust specks. So once you wipe the car down, this will help prevent that also. This vehicle is now ready to apply the ArmorCoat. Because the product cannot be sanded and polished, extra time is taken to make sure that you can spray it as clean as possible. The painter will wear a paint suit, tack the vehicle down, and stay in the booth until the entire process is finished. All right, the last step before we go into booth to spray is mixing the product. We're going to be mixing component A 1-to-1 with component B and 10% reduction based on outside temperature. We're spraying in an outside temperature of around 30 degrees Fahrenheit now, but we have our booth temperature set at 80 degrees. This will ensure that we get the product on evenly and the product will stay open and wet long enough to get it onto the vehicle. As the temperature rises, we need to add more of the reducer, as it is a retardant. And the max amount we can add to the product is 20%. Once it's at the 20% range, if the outside temperature is too hot to spray it at that time, we recommend waiting until a cooler temperature in order to spray it. We're mixing the reduction by weight. So 10% of the total weight of part A and part B together will be the reduction. Depending on the size of the vehicle you're spraying will depend on how much product to pre-mix before going into the booth. We like to mix all of our product before we go into booth so we don't have to step out once the spray process begins. Once in the spray room, the painter will not exit the booth until the ArmorCoat is done. This will ensure we don't have any extra dirt that doesn't need to be into the product, due to the fact The product cannot be cut and polished, so we want to spray it as clean as possible. At this time, he will look over his edges of his tape to make sure nothing got missed that he couldn't see when it wasn't in the booth, because the lighting in your spray room is usually always better than the lighting out in the shop. With the vehicle taped off, you could see how we contoured the tape line to match the vehicle's body lines. This stands out now that it's in tape, but once the vehicle's unmasked, the line on the hood and fenders will become virtually invisible. He's now setting the air pressure at the gun, going into the gun at 35 PSI. This is not a set in stone pressure. It's like, that seems to be what works best with a SATA RP with a 1.3 tip. The product has to be atomized, so real low air pressure with this product is not recommended. Our first coat is a medium wet, basically tack coat. We like to spray this as you want it to look all the way through the whole process. The painter will apply approximately 10 coats of product to ensure we have rock chip protection. ArmorCoat is based like Kevlar to the point where the more you apply it, the stronger it gets. You can put as many as 20 coats of ArmorCoat on the front of a vehicle, and all it will do is actually help the rock chipping more. Because it's clear rubber, it stays elastic, and that's what keeps the rocks bouncing off the front of the vehicle. The first coat of the product stays wet the longest. After we start applying, the painter will check it to see if it starts to get tacky, as he would clear coat. Once we get to the point that we feel it's starting to tack up, he'll start applying the coats. The more we put on as we get going, the elapsed time in between coats will be less. Temperature makes a big difference on how many coats we can apply within a certain amount of time. We like to see this product applied wet on wet continuously. To ensure a nice clean tape line, we keep the tape line wet even when the product is not ready for another coat. We will dust a coat of ArmorCoat across the tape line to make sure that stays wet and does not have a chance to tack up throughout the spray process. The ArmorCoat sprays exactly like a 2.1 high solids clear. The product will end up with a shine and durability as a 2.1 high solids clear and should look like it as you're spraying it. We want to see a nice shiny smooth finish in between each coat. The product can also be put on a little drier in applications where you don't want as much gloss, but the application that we like to see is putting it on with as nice as the factory finish and not being able to tell the ArmorCoat's been applied. You'll notice he went back over the tape line 2 times in that coat just to ensure that tape line stays wet. At this point, the ArmorCoat's starting to dry faster as we're spraying it, and he will actually be able to just keep going basically from coat to coat until the product's completely installed. Some painters like to wait quite a bit of time in between coats. If you wait too long with ArmorCoat and it starts to set up, it does not re-wet itself, so the product then does not have the nice smooth finish that it's capable of having from the start to finish. The tape line just now got removed in one smooth step, pulling the tape over top of itself away from the material. This will ensure a smooth tape line edge on top of the hood. That is the completion of the application. The next stage, we'll let the booth run for 3 to 5 minutes, depending on outside temperature, and then we will shut the booth off and let the product gas through itself. After exiting the booth, we recommend cleaning the paint gun immediately, as the pot life of the ArmorCoat is roughly a half hour. And while that's going, we usually use that time to let the fan run. Then we're pretty well assured that we can shut it off to keep it from having any sags or any other extra dirt that could possibly be into the finish. This process took 2 people approximately 2 hours from start to finish, which included prepping the car, sanding the car, masking the car, and spraying the vehicle. A normal tape time on a vehicle is usually a minimum of 1.5 to 2 hours. These usually take approximately 3 hours for one man to do.